What's good, everybody? It's 2018 and it's what is today? Thursday? That sounds like a great time to completely redo your pedal board. This is what we're currently working with. It has worked very well for me for a while now, but I don't know, I get bored, I want to do it again. I've got some toys that I want to add, some things I want to move. Right now the biggest problem I have is space, and there's some other things I want to put on here. So to put things on here, I'm going to have to take some stuff off. The biggest thing we're taking off is the volume pedal. It's giant, and I don't use it at every gig. But the plan is to remove this, slide everything over, keep this next to the board. So on the gigs that I need a volume pedal, it's there and it's available. We'll go into details as to how I'm doing that and why I'm doing how I'm doing it. The other thing that I really want to move is I have the tap tempo that controls all three of these pedals. I want to move that on the board as well. Right now, off the side of the board, when I try and step on it, I can hit the edge of the case. It's just not a comfortable place for me, so I want to get that right here. In a second, we're going to switch over and I'm going to show you all the stuff I'm going to be adding. And then we'll go from there, step by step, on how to do your pedal board. Alright, here's some new stuff we're putting on. One, I'm adding a handful of new toys, so I needed another power supply. There's already 2 power supplies underneath the board, but this T-Rex fuel tank, 5 more outputs, that should be plenty for this project. I just got this in, Walrus Audio Fathom Reverb. This thing is fantastic. Right up until now, I haven't had a dedicated reverb pedal. I've just been relying on the reverb on my AC30, which has been fine, but it's nice to have something that'll just go longer whenever I need it to. Klon KTR. Do some research about the Klon Centaur, this overdrive pedal, and you'll know why I'm so excited to finally get to put this on here. It's been a little bit too big for me to just swap out up until now, so rearrange, make some room, things are going to be sweet. I've got this little AB switch. The purpose of this is right now when I'm using my wireless, I can leave all the cables plugged in on my board. When I want to go hardwired, I have to physically unplug a cable and then plug in my standard 1/4 inch. The Georgel cables will last longer if you do not plug them and unplug them on a night-to-night basis. I can plug my wireless in here, I can go out to the rest of the pedal board here, and then plug in my regular hardwired 1/4 inch cable. And on the night where I decide I'm going to use the wireless, bam, now I'm using wireless. Now I'm not using wireless. I can also leave the 1/4 inch plugged in all the time in case the wireless fails on me. I can just pick it up, hit a button, and I'm good. This is a little single loop true bypass looper. We talked in the last video about me moving my volume pedal off the board. What this is going to let me do is, instead of having to, the way the pedal board's wired, it would be weird or complicated for me to go to the last pedal in the chain, run a cable out to the volume pedal, and go back and plug it. I don't want to have to plug and unplug everything all the time. So this is going to sit on the board sideways. The only thing in this loop is going to be the volume pedal, which we're moving off of it. Turn it on when I'm using the volume pedal. Turn it off when I can't use the volume pedal. If I'm not using the volume pedal and I need to mute, turn it on. It's not going anywhere. It's going to mute the signal. This is just a patch bay, 4 in, 4 out. Currently I have a 5 in, 5 out patch bay up here. I only need 4 right now, so hooray. This thing is a sweet little piece of technology. This is just a pedal board clock. Takes a standard Boss 9-volt power cable, and it'll count up, count down. It'll give you the actual time. The battery inside of it says it'll last for 10 years. So, I don't know, we'll give it a shot. It's tiny. It's the smallest thing on the pedal board. And I think it'll be a cool little toy. The last 2 things up here, ideally what I want to do with this board is make it so I can swap in and out of playing acoustic to electric very easily. So if you've ever seen my acoustic pedal board, I have the Radio Pro 48 active direct box. I love this thing. And then a delay pedal. It doesn't have to be this delay pedal, but I like a little bit of delay on my acoustic all the time. This is actually going to get mounted underneath my pedal board, because I don't really need to touch it or turn it on or off ever. This needs to be mounted on top, so when you get to the gig, you can tell the engineer, oh, my acoustic, oh, that's just the DI on top of my pedal board, piece of cake. So we're going to take everything off the board, and then we're going to try and fit everything on the board in the way I want it to go. We'll see how that works. For anybody interested in what the underside of the board looked like before I tear this all apart, here's the two power supplies, JHS buffered splitter, so guitar goes in, one side goes out to the rest of the pedal board, the other side goes out to my tuner. I'll show you why that's important later. Full tone True Path ABY. I love this pedal. It lets me run 2 amps, a wet and a dry setup. This just splits the signal after the majority of my pedal board and goes to both amps. And then my Line 6 is G50 relay wireless. I mounted the antennas on the top of the board. You have to get different antennas than the ones that come with it. The plan is to put this on top of the board at the next build, so we'll see if it all fits. Alright, good as new. Now let's see if we can make all this shit fit. Okay, well it looks like if I want to keep my DI mounted to the board, I'm going to have to mount it underneath and then run an XLR probably to a panel on the side of the board or something like that. It's not the worst thing in the world. I wish it could be somewhere on top. There's just really no good place realistically to put it. Alright, so here's where we're at. This delay is going to get mounted under the board. It's only for the acoustic. So out of the output of the tuner, which is muted whenever the tuner is active, which is when I'm using all of my electric stuff, whenever the tuner is active, the output for my acoustic will be muted. Underneath the board it will go through the delay pedal, and then on the side of the board I'll mount another 1/4" jack where I can just throw this in my box, plug in 1/4" and say, look, here's my DI, here's my acoustic DI, you're done. Easy. The rest of this, I think, is going to work. I hope it's going to work. What else is going under the board? The buffered splitter, JHS. The full tone True Path splitter for my wet and dry amp setup. These two pedal power 2s. And a T-Rex fuel tank. So first we got to get all this stuff secured, then we got to drill some holes, then we got to run some cables and mount some pedals and see how it goes. So the next step here is millimeter by millimeter, looking around here, making sure you have everything exactly where you want it, because we're about to mark the board with a silver Sharpie. Now why don't we just go get some Velcro and start putting it down piece by piece? Well, I want to mark the board with silver Sharpie so I know where everything's going to be. Take the board off, look at where I'm going to drill some holes. Potentially. Then I want to flip the board over and see how those holes are going to affect where I'm putting my power supplies, my other delay pedal. It's just a little bit of planning. Marking it with a silver Sharpie also will come off with a little alcohol wipe, so when the board is done and pretty, you can get rid of all your little marks. Piece of cake. Okay, just kidding. I know we had everything perfect and then we marked everything, but I think I've got a better solution. I swapped the tuner and the wireless because I think that's going to give me a better opportunity to mount these power supplies underneath the board without really having too much of a problem with space, getting the cables around them underneath it. You'll see when we start drilling holes. But yeah, I think this is a better solution. I just got to clean up my markings and then it's time to start Velcroing shit. Okay, here's the reason my pedal boards last as long as they do. Very good Velcro. This is 3M Dual Lock. I buy it from the same company who makes the pedal board, trailertrashpedalboards.com, if you want to plug. I'm not sponsored by them. I love those guys to death. Shout out to Rooster and the guy who's running it in California right now. When you buy it from them, they sell it by the foot, $6 a foot. Each foot gives you both sides. It's really hard to see right here, but there's like a much more compact side, and there's like a more spread apart side. When these lock together, you have to kind of snap them together, but it is intense. Like, you can pull it apart, but you cannot pull it straight up. They often recommend, if you're trying to take pedals off your pedal board when this stuff is attached, to use like a butter knife or something to get in between them. Since I started using this, I've never had a pedal fall off my board. Since I started using this, because my pedals aren't shifting, wiggling, shaking, I've never had a George L cable, these little solderless cables, die on my board. I will never use any Velcro other than 3M Dual Lock, and honestly, I've tried buying it from a few different places, and unless you can buy a 150-foot roll, the cheapest place I've found to buy it has been trailertrashpedalboards.com. Those guys are fantastic. I cannot say enough good things about them. So most of these pedals already have one side on them because I just pulled them off my old board. Some of them do not. Some of them need both sides. We're going to speed up this video so you can watch the whole process go down, but this will take a minute. That's it. Every pedal's on the board. So we're going to let this dry for a day. Then we're going to pull it all off. And we're going to clean up the board and we're going to start drilling holes. It's going to be amazing. Alright, so where we left off, all the glue's dry. I can pick up this entire board. I can't physically do it because it's so heavy with one hand or one pedal, but it's very easy to pick it up with two pedals. They do not come off. I love this Velcro to death. The next thing we need to do is we need to pull all the pedals off, drill some holes through the board where all of our cables are going to come in and out. Before I do that, I need to be careful about where I drill these holes because I have 3 power supplies, an ABY switcher, a buffer, and a delay pedal that I'll be mounting underneath the board. So while the pedals are still on here, I want to set these power supplies out where I think I want them to go. And if that all works, I'll just make note of where I need to drill some holes in the pedals that they might potentially be covering up. So these are the 2 big beefiest ones. The one thing that I've read and I've found to be true is that crybaby wah-wahs in particular do not like being mounted directly above a power supply. For whatever reason, the electronics, you can get a buzz out of it. I've seen it happen, I've seen it not happen, so I'm not the expert on this stuff, but it has worked for me to mount them as far as possible away from the wah pedal. So what we're going to try and do, I also need to offset these a little bit just so I can get the power cables in. So one of them is probably going to be up here and the other one a little bit lower next to it. And what that means for the chorus is I'll need to drill the hole a little bit to the left of the center of the pedal. For this overdrive, for the Angry Charlie, a little bit lower than I wanted to. This on the KDR Klon, a little bit lower. And on the wireless, I need to drill the hole higher and to the right of where I would just straight through the center of the pedal. In addition to those 2 power supplies, we have our third. Not going to be able to get too far away from the wah with this one, but over here should be totally fine. So that'll probably end up sitting right here. It won't really affect the tuner. It will affect that power cable, so maybe a little bit lower here. As long as the power cable will come out of here, I'm fine. This could probably scoot up a little bit. Also, the power input from this is going to come from this power supply, so I need to make sure I give it a little more wiggle room than that. That should probably do it. Now, in addition to that, the ABY True Bypass. This is one of the last things in my chain before it runs out to the amps, because I'm doing a wet-dry setup. That I can mount all the way on this end. The wah pedal will have one hole drilled somewhere underneath it to get cables in and out, but other than that, there's a lot of real estate under the board that I can take advantage of. So it's probably going to be up here somewhere, close to there. That looks right. The JHS buffered splitter. This goes in between my guitar input / wireless input and splits out to the tuner and splits out to the rest of the board. So ideally, someplace up here would be perfect. There's going to be a big hole in the center here with a ton of cables coming out, and it might have to feed all the other cables that are coming from these 3 pedals. So I got to stay away from there, but anywhere else is pretty much fair game. Probably something like that ish. And then the last pedal I have to worry about is the Boss delay that's only going to be used for my acoustic. I've tried in the past to mount this kind of low, but it's actually too thick of a pedal to get too far down on this board because it's an angled board. It'll hit the bottom of the case. Realistically, what's probably going to end up with this, even though it's going to have to run from the tuner out into the delay and then out of the board, we might just send it out of the board on this side if that's the case. We'll probably end up mounting it right about here. So pedals that aren't going to be affected at all by this are all along the bottom, and that's totally fine. So I rock that off, and you see the Velcro is still there. It's still on the board. It's going to be there until you throw it away. In fact, I'm going to show you my old board again. It's very ugly now, but the Velcro is still there, and you can see all the holes that I drilled. A couple holes that I drilled a couple times up here for the wireless antenna, which we won't have to worry about anymore. Now the holes I drilled are almost the exact size I need them to be. They're just a little bit too shallow because of the taper of the bit and the thickness of the board. It actually makes like a cone feeding down into it, which makes it very hard to get one of the power cables through it. I'm going to grab one of these and show you what I mean. Never mind, it seems to work perfectly. But this does also mean that you need, because the head of each power cable is so thick, you need to run power before you run signal. All of the George L cables, I got a stash of them here. The George L cables, you can put the end on after you get it through the hole. But it can make it very hard to get this little power cable through if you've already got 2 or 3 cables going into it. So run power first. You'll be much happier in the end. So now we go about actually mounting the power supplies. Let's see if I can remember where I wanted to put them, right? There's one up here. One a little bit farther down so I could still get this cable to come in. Also wanted to leave a little bit of slack on this bend. You don't want to bend any cable too tight. Power cable going up or down? Doesn't really matter to me. Let's do a power cable coming out up. This pedal in particular, if you got down low enough, it would look like it doesn't really have the clearance to make it underneath here, and that would be true if you put this board flat on the stage. But this board in particular, the lid of the case comes off and the board is on the ground, and there's actually a little bit of room between the padding in here, the foam, so you have like an extra 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch, so that will work out just fine. And then the buffered splitter, bam, the other way. So that's how we want to mount this stuff. Let me grab the power supply for this, the power cable, just to make sure. Just make sure it'll make this bend okay. And it's a little tight, so we're going to give it a little bit of extra room here. That's why we do this, though. Now we're going to do the same thing we did with the pedals on the top. We're going to mark where we want these. Again, said markings will come out very easily. Unless I did this. Oh no, I've started overthinking things. It still fit through? Yeah. I like this better because it's a little bit higher up, less chance of it hitting the bottom of the wood of the board. Still not blocking any holes. I'm going to flip it over again to make sure I've actually drilled every hole. So you're definitely not going to hit the bottom of the board with the power supply, but now it's too close to the wah. So going back. Yeah, again, this still works just fine. There's no reason to. Still gives you plenty of room to run a spool full of cables through here. Yeah, this is the way. This is how we're doing it. Now we're gonna get out our good friend, the heat gun. And we're just going to put these down. This, you know, this is getting pretty easy for us at this point. All right, so everything's down. You should wait for these to dry. You should wait for these to dry. But I'm getting a little impatient, and I have a rehearsal theoretically on 2 days that I need to have this ready for. So, back to work. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to label every hole that's in here. All right. I know it seems kind of excessive, but when you start running cables, then you have a problem, and you have to troubleshoot which output goes to which hole, which pedal. This will save you a ton of time. Trust me, I've done this before. I've screwed this up before. So let's do it right the first time. We're going to label all the holes that we have in this damn board. So, first things first, this is the crybaby. This is the RC booster. This is the 3-loop true bypass. We'll just say looper. No. Piece of cake. Holes labeled. So now we need to take the appropriate power and run them to every pedal. I say appropriate power because the wireless unit, which isn't RF, needs a special cable, a current doubler, so it ends up taking 2 outputs on one of the power supplies. The Strymon takes another special, I don't know if that's a current doubler as well. I'm going to have to go back and check my notes. Everything else is a single 9-volt, everything else runs off 9-volt, everything else is groovy. So let's go grab a bunch of power cables, feed them through holes, and see how it all fits together. For now, I'm going to pull the cable all the way through just to get the slack out of the way. But when you go back later, you're going to see where we leave some slack underneath. We want to leave all of the slack underneath the board so it doesn't clutter up the top of our board and still looks pretty. Look at that. Every single hole in all 3 power supplies have been filled. Everything has power, theoretically, when we flip over the board and actually give everything power. So far, so good. Everything Everything's labeled. It's perfect. So what we're going to do now is, one of the reasons we pulled all this slack through is we need to start tidying this stuff down. Everybody thinks that you just kind of put all your cables in there and then tidy it up later. You need to kind of tidy it as you go. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a whole mess of bullshit. So what we're going to do that, I want to get all these cables kind of bundled, and they're going to go right here. And I'm going to drill something to hold them all together. In fact, I could drill a hole right here with this little coupler. You'll see in a second. I'm going to do this over and over. And what's going to end up happening is we're going to try and keep the cable runs on this thing consistent or organized. So all these cables go down, then they go over, then they go to here, then they break off in 2 different directions, 3 different directions, okay? But I want to keep this as tight and tidy as possible. So let's grab a little bin. You saw me pull these off the old board. Got a handful of big ones here. I'm going to use as many of these big ones as I can for now because it's very easy to go in, pull the screw out, replace which plastic piece you use. You'll see some of these are way smaller, so when you only need to put 2 cables together as opposed to a bundle. But for now we're going to go with all the big ones we can and then size them down as we get audio run through it as well. Dig through here and see what we can find. These other cables that feel a little bit loose still, I'm probably going to end up clamping them down further when I get audio in. But for now, this is looking great. The patch bay I'm going to leave loose for now because it's going to have 4 audio cables coming out of it, and this much slack doesn't really bother me at the moment. So that's the beginnings of our power routing. So now we're going to flip the board over. Always save the screws. Now we're going to put the pedals back on. I know there's some sawdust in here now. We're putting the pedals back on now just to get the length of the power cables before we tighten those up on the underneath the board. Before we finally push the pedals down with audio and everything involved and everything's done, we're going to come back and pick all of the sawdust out of the Velcro. Trust me, you'll hate yourself if you don't do it now. Now look at all this extra slack. I want to tidy this up at every end. I don't want to do it in the middle. I want to do it right at the end next to where the pedal is, because at some point if I get a new delay pedal or something, if I get a new delay pedal or a new overdrive or something, and I need more slack for the power cable to reach around to it, I want to be able to flip the board over, pull as much slack out as I need, re-drill the clamp. I don't want to have to go back to here and find out where that cable was and which slack pile it's in. I want it right next to where the cable is, right next to where the pedal is. Alright, again, let's flip it over, see what she looks like. little bit of slack here and there. This one we expected because it's going to another pedal, underneath another pedal, so it looks a little weird, but I can handle that. All in all, I'm pretty happy so far. So, we're all powered up. All of these pedals have a cable already plugged into the jack. Some pedals won't turn on unless it detects the cable. All of these pedals have a cable plugged into them. I put it in there mainly to help determine spacing when I was setting everything on the board. But because they have that cable in them, and because they have power, if I power up those power supplies with a cable I'll go grab, we should be able to turn on every pedal and make sure every pedal works. But everything else seems to be powering on. The wall doesn't have an LED on it, so we're just going to assume that it's working perfectly, right? So we're off to a great start. Next stop, audio. So I have all of my George-L cables from my last pedal board. I've already snipped the ends to clean them up, at least on this end. Some of them still have connectors attached. If they're still good connections, no reason to undo them. You will need one end totally clean so you can pass it through all the holes. But I've tried to get them pretty close to the same here at the top. That way I can see how long they are at the bottom, and ideally I can find the right length of cable that I need out of these scraps to do the board. If I run into a situation where I don't have something long enough to go from wherever to wherever, I also bought 10 feet, just one 10-foot section of George-L cable that I can splice in as needed. So I'm going to start at the top of the board, from the wireless to the AB switch. Let's see what we can find out here. Now it's going underneath and around some other things back there, so I don't think I can use any of the white ones. But I can probably use this blue one. Let's see if we can use this cable. So we're going to feed through here. Now it looks like the pedal is actually pinching the audio cable here, but the size of the Velcro gives it just enough of a cushion to get underneath the pedal into the hole without really putting it under any stress. For now, I'm just going to take off the wah pedal because it seems to be the most prone to coming off, and I don't need to be reattaching it. Take off the AB switch. And this is plenty of length. And we got a little bit of slack here, which is fine, because we're going to trim the end a little bit, add another connector to it. I'll show you how I put on the connectors and why. So I'm going to grab an old cable here, pull the cap off, unscrew the top. The first time I did a pedal board, I didn't use a wrench to do the screwing and unscrewing of these, and my thumb was so raw and torn open because you want to wrench these things down pretty tight, and if you do it with your thumb and you do it 100 times, it's pretty brutal. So take out the old cable that we're not using anymore. This little tiny end's getting in the garbage. I'm going to take this end. I don't think I'm going to take any extra slack off of this. It actually feels like just the right length. You see how it's kind of rounded? It's really hard to tell, but you want it round. Usually when you cut it, it'll pinch it together and make it flat, and you just use your fingers to make it round again. Force the Georgel over the end of it, all the way down, so you know the spike hits the center post here. Give it like a quarter turn, bend it over, grab the cap, screw it on with your fingers as far as you can without tearing your thumb open. Remember, you're going to do this a lot. I'm going to take the wrench, finish it off. Put the cap back on. Plug it in. Bam, one done. All right. We're going to speed through the rest of these, see how long it takes us. Timeout. So what did we just wire? We went from the wireless to the AB switcher. So I'm going to select between either the wireless or a hard cable that I plug in. Out of the AB switcher into the buffer splitter. One side of the buffered splitter goes to the tuner, so the tuner can always be on. The other side of the buffered splitter goes to the wah pedal. Out of the wah into the 3-loop. First loop is the octave, second loop is the overdrive, third loop is the other overdrive. Out of the loop into the compressor, out of the compressor into the boost, out of the boost into the single loop, which is going to be volume pedal that sits off the board, out of the single loop into the full tone splitter, out of the full tone splitter left and right here, and that goes out to my wet and dry amp. We'll label these nice, probably make my wife do it because she has great handwriting. And now we're going to get started on the effects loop, which is this pedal, this pedal, this pedal, this pedal, and this pedal. Not necessarily in that order. We'll talk through the order at some point, but it's not the order that it's laid out in. It's just, we'll talk about it. Hello, Robert. Okay, I think that's it for today. Next step, we're going to tie these down, secure them so it makes it look really nice. And we've got some soldering to do. 2 expression cables from here, one to the tremolo, one to the chorus, and then 2 more audio cables out of the 1 splitter to 2 jacks here, which is going to go off to the volume pedal. And then we still need to mount the tap tempo on the front here, and drill 3 outputs, 1 to the tremolo, 1 to the chorus, and 1 to the Strymon dig. Alright, so we're going to take a little pause. I'm going to go buy some more cable so I can make that final tap tempo run to the chorus. Then we tidy this all up. I make 2 more cables to come out of here to go to the volume pedal, and that's it. Okay, I went out, got some more cable. It's time to do the last couple pieces of wiring on here. We'll tidy everything up. It'll look beautiful. We'll do some extra cables over here, some extra cables over here, and then we'll test. Holy shit. Alright, that's it. I made these last few little cables, cleaned them up a little bit because they were getting kind of ratty on this end in particular. But it's done. It works. Everything works. It's amazing. I haven't changed the clock yet. I need to go find the manual for that, but until then it's going to be off by an hour. I'm going to talk through the signal chain if anybody's interested, and I'll explain a couple of things, the reason I do what I do here. First things first, the wireless or the wired guitar goes into this AB switcher. The reason being, when I'm using the wireless, I can keep my wired cable coiled, plugged in, ready to go in case the wireless drops out, the battery dies, something terrible happens. All I have to do is unplug that, plug this cable in, hit a button, and I'm good to go. Back in business. Out of here, it goes into a JHS buffered splitter. The splitter goes to the tuner, and out of the tuner, I'll explain in a minute. The other end of the splitter, the buffered splitter, goes into the wah. I kind of like my wah almost close to first in the chain, before overdrives, before compression, before anything else. Just sounds good for me. Out of the wah into the 3-loop, the first loop being the Octaplus, the octave, second loop being the KDR Klon, the third loop being the JHS Angry Charlie. So I've got my octave, my 2 distortions right in front of me, very close, stuff that I like to go to all the time. Out of the 3-loop into the compressor, out of the compressor into the RC booster, my little solo boost also gives me a little more low end. Out of here into this single loop. The only thing in this loop are these 2 jacks on the side of the board which feed into my volume pedal. The reason I did this is because, one, I needed to get the volume pedal off the board, if you remember the beginning of the video, because it was just too much space, and there's some gigs, some stages I play that are too small to have another 6 or 8 inches on this side. So if I'm on a gig where I'm not able to use the volume pedal, this stays switched off. All right, just pass the signal through. Switch it on. The volume pedal works as intended. I'm gonna leave it off for right now because I still need to clean up this connection over here. So out of this loop, it goes into a full tone ABY true path splitter, which splits my signal to 2 different guitar amps, a Vox AC30 and a Supro 115 Thunderbolt. The Vox AC30 has an effects loop, which is where the rest of this stuff comes in. So the effects send and return right here. From the amp goes directly to this Strymon Dig. I love this delay so much. Out of the Strymon Dig into the carbon copy delay. This one I actually just leave on all the time, like a little slapback. Out of the carbon copy into the warped vinyl, you'll notice that this pedal is on all the time, same as the semaphore, the tremolo. So I keep my chorus and my tremolo on all the time, and I control them with this dual access expression pedal. The reason being is I used to play in a band where I was the only guitar. It was guitar, bass, drums, and harmonica. And for me to turn on a tremolo sounded kind of jarring to the audience, so I wanted to be able to fade it in and fade it out. Same with the chorus. now that fills all my needs, and it's perfect. It's exactly how I want it. Now I'm playing in more bands with more instruments, and that's not as necessary, but I really like the way it sounds and the way it feels to create those things in. So I can't get rid of it now. Then out of the Semaphore is in my new Walrus Audio Fathom Reverb. This thing is incredible, with a sustain switch that will sustain indefinitely, maybe? I don't know, we'll see. Then out of the Fathom, back to the amp. Now I mentioned the thing about the coming out of the tuner. I wanted this board to be set up for my acoustic guitar all the time. So coming out of the tuner has nothing to do with the rest of my electric signal. What it does do is it goes from the tuner into a Boss DD5 delay pedal that's on just a little slapback, just like the carbon copy. And then out of that DD5, a jack on the side. So this 1/4" jack on the side, I'll take a cable out, plug it into a DI box and say, hey sound guy, here's the DI for the acoustic as well. I have the same tuner, the same cables, the same wireless. I can use all of that stuff together. And all I have to do is fade out the volume on the electric, so the acoustic won't go to the electric amp. It's super flexible for me. I love only having to have one wireless unit. You can't leave your acoustic guitar plugged in the whole gig if you're going to use it for one song, because it'll kill the battery, and this kind of negates that because I'm always using the same cable. I'm really happy with the way this thing came together. The only other thing I have to do is get a cotton swab and some nail polish remover just to clean up the little marks we made when we mounted the pedals initially. But everything's working as intended. I couldn't be happier, and hopefully I'll figure a way to speed up this 10-hour video so you're just watching like maybe a 5 or 10 minute video. That'd be much more pleasurable to watch, I think, instead of me sweating for 10 hours. Thank you guys so much for paying attention to this. This is actually a lot of fun for me. If you have any questions, please hit me on Twitter at EvanLambGuitar. I'll put that in the description as well. Thank you guys so much. It was a blast.